Hi, everyone. Welcome to the BC Home Group real estate video update chat. We have the wonderful Dylan here. Dylan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself here.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. So I'm Dylan Taylor. I am a real estate lawyer here in Victoria. I practice at Dawson Mullen Law, who's been doing real estate conveyancing for about a dozen years now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming online. I just want to, I'm sure you're aware of this, but as realtors, we are not licensed lawyers. And 80% of what we do is we deal with contracts or contract law. And we need you guys. We're always, and I wanted to thank you on one particular deal. You were there for me as I asked you legal questions. You were saying, Shireen, make sure you word it like this or put this clause in. And thank you for that. So, what are some questions that you get a lot from realtors or things that you see a lot in contracts, real estate contracts, that you feel we should be letting people know more about?
Yeah, for sure. You guys do a lot of the heavy lifting in the sense that you put the clients into these legal contracts, right? And you're going to set them out
Yeah,
and for a while there we knew they were basically unconditional, right? So you were
those
coming
scary
to us and
times
there were
last.
so
Yeah.
you were needing me a lot quicker or be able to do things on the fly that you now, right, when we're in a conditioned environment, we're able to kind of take a breath and slow down a bit and actually do that proper due diligence that we ought to be doing, right? And I think um what I get asked a lot, title is an important one that I get asked a lot on, right? There's certain charges on title when you do that search that aren't going to be that common. So I think a lot of people reach out to me at that stage.
And the big one, actually, good thing you brought that up. The big one I see a lot are the building scheme ones. Anything in particular that you say, hey, heads up, warning about the building schemes when you see those on title?
Yeah, well, it's always a red flag. Anytime you see a building scheme on there, you're going to want to pull that charge and read it and see exactly what's on there because they set out an array of restrictions. The developer does that, is going to limit what the person can do on the property. There's certain ones where, it needs to be designed a specific way. A driveway needs to go this way, or you can't park a boat on the driveway. You can't paint it whatever color you want, right? So in the event that the house ever, burnt down or something like that and had to be rebuilt, you would have to do it. You'd have to pull out that building scheme and build it as exactly as it says, right? So that's a
So
big one.
let me ask you something. I know in one situation where we were dealing with a building scheme from the 1930s. It was still on title, and it looked like everyone in that neighborhood did not care about that building scheme for the life of it. And we were kind of advised that it's there, but really it's not enforceable. And you can go to court to ask to have it removed because this whole neighborhood has changed.
Yeah.
Is that really enforceable? Can you really say that's the case?
Well, I would say as long if it hasn't expired, then it would still be enforceable. But then it goes to who's going to enforce it, though, right? That's where it comes down to,
That's what
especially
they
if,
were saying. No one's going to enforce it. So you guys go ahead, go to court and try to have it removed. And I said, okay, well, I obviously I don't pitch that because like you said, from a legal perspective, it's there, it's enforceable.
yeah, exactly. But you know, I think when you go, like, if you don't probably wouldn't want to take on that expense to go to court to get it removed if your clients were just happy with it and
Yeah.
nobody follows it, right? I think because if anyone was ever trying to enforce it down the line, you'd have a pretty good argument that based on tradition, custom, and all those sorts of arguments that it's not
Oh,
enforceable and nobody's done so for 30 years. So I think that would likely get thrown out.
okay. So I've dealt with a situation like that too, where no one's said anything about certain access and they
Mhm.
called it implied.
Yeah.
So because over 20 years, maybe the situation is no one said anything about the building scheme and everyone's changed everything in the neighborhood, then you can imply that it's been accepted that this has been removed. Is that correct from a
That's
legal?
correct. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. As long as the
Okay.
judge says so, right? As long as the
As
judge
long
says so, then it's fine.
as, okay.
Um,
Okay.
and that's the same thing while we're talking about titles easements, right? There's some implied easements as well.
Uh,
A handshake deal 35 years ago that this person could pass along this part of the property. and they do so for 30 years, and then a new owner comes in, puts up a barricade, well, there's a good chance that a judge is going to say that that is an implied easement and you can still use it.
Yeah. And that's something to be aware of when buying properties, to always check your title. That's the number one thing I do, because the title tells you so much. It tells you when they bought it. It tells you sometimes what they do. Sometimes I've seen some interesting job titles on there, on the titles,
Yeah.
only to find out that it's changed now. So it's not always accurate either, because they don't update it. They just updated it 50 years ago, and things can change a lot since 50 years when you buy the property from when you bought the property.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. Is there anything else besides the title and these charges and whatnot that you feel that buyers should be aware of?
Yeah, I think the big one and is people need to know about the transfer tax, right? The property transfer tax, which is
Oh, good
yeah,
one.
which is the British Columbia, not special, but definitely most expensive, right? And people need to know that when you're buying a property, just because you're buying it for say 500, it's there's going to be that tax that applies, and they need to be aware of that.
And is it true that it's Alberta doesn't have this tax, correct? It's
I
us in Toronto, I believe, Ontario.
yeah, I think every province does have one, but like
Oh,
it's so minimal in Alberta that you wouldn't really care like or notice.
gotcha. But the
Yeah.
one here quite significant, especially for foreigners. Now, speaking of foreigners, there's all these laws that are coming into play soon. The foreign, what is it? The foreign buyer ban, they're
Yeah.
calling it.
Yep.
The,
Yep. The
tell us
ban on
more.
foreign entities. Pardon me?
Yeah. Tell us more about that one, because that's
Yeah.
one that no one's really clear on, including our real estate board. They're like, we don't have a lot of instructions, but basically after December, we don't know if it applies to residential only. So do you
Yeah.
have more information than what we're getting out here as realtors?
Unfortunately not. I do get asked this one quite often, right?
Yeah.
And I checked out the piece of legislation, I looked it up and I read it, right? And I think the big issue is there's absolutely going to be a ban. It's going to be a 2-year ban, and that's coming in for sure. But the difficulty, I think, from your perspective right now is does that apply retroactively? Meaning, if I get into if I'm a foreign buyer and I get into a contract today, but it doesn't close until the end of January,
Correct. Yeah.
what's going to happen? Am I not going to be able to go through with the sale? Are they going to stop me at the land title office? There's all sorts of variables that we don't have answers to right now.
Well, we consulted, because I'm dealing with quite a few foreign buyers right now on our team, and me and the team that's working with me. So they were saying that we were advised, because we all spoke to our managing broker. It's okay as long as the contract goes firm before, you can close after December, as long
Hmm.
as the contract closes before December 30th. I mean, like, subjects
Yeah.
are removed before December 31st. You can
Hmm.
close after. It's fine.
Right.
But again, I'm like always, risk averse. I'm like,
Yeah.
nope, let's just close it now. We'll do a rent back clause. And you can talk more about what's that, putting a rent back clause in there.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that just to that point, though, I don't know if it's actually clear in the legislation that it's not going to apply retroactively, right? And so I think your point of closing it now, or at least before that comes into effect, is super important, because in the past, the government can do whatever they want. They can make laws that weren't a thing now apply, and you would have to pay the fine or whatever that is, right? So you want to be careful around those sorts of things. And then as far as like a rent back situation goes, it's I think no different than maybe a private mortgage, whereas the vendor, the seller is now putting a mortgage on title over under certain terms, and you're basically buying it from them in that sort of way.
Okay. So that would be more of a vendor take back situation.
Yeah,
But you could do it without that, where you close the deal, get your mortgage, get everything in place, and then you just write a tenancy agreement with the seller to say, okay, I know I closed really soon and you still need time to find a place, but you can rent my place until you find a place, correct?
totally. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
That
the
too.
rent back situation. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
but there's also potentially some difficulties there, right? When you get into the tenancy issues, and if you're creating a
Yeah.
tenancy agreement, but yet you only want them out in maybe a month and a half, then you're still going to need to follow those guidelines, and you may not be able to do so in a short period of time.
Yeah, yeah, no, these are good points. And that's why I love doing this video with you to put that awareness out there for all my listeners and giving that important real estate update to them. So the
Mhm.
other thing that I wanted to talk about, so we've talked about the foreign buyer ban. There's this new rescission period as well. And that also is another legislation that's come out that we're not unclear about. So
Yeah.
tell us more about that. I want you to.
Yeah, I think the cooling off period that they've called it is just going to allow you I think 3 days or so to get you can't enter a non-conditional deal. You need 3 days to do some due diligence, right? And I think that was more important during that time period where every deal was unconditional and everyone was panicking and throwing deals at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In today's market, you're going to be getting your week condition period to do your due diligence. So, is it going to be as effective? It will be if the market changes again, right? And at least they have that safeguard in place now. So I don't think it's a bad idea, but it may not be as effective now as they were hoping back, 6 months ago.
Yeah, because we really don't need it now. Okay, so essentially what that this is when a buyer comes to buy a property, they have they write the offer like they normally would.
Hmm.
They put the offer in. They say, okay, I'm willing to pay this much. But they sleep on it and a week, is it a week after or 3 days?
I
How
think it's
long is
3 days.
just 3 days?
I'm pretty
So
sure.
three
Yeah.
days, but is there something they need to add to the contract for that or they don't?
No, no.
It's just implied that all contracts now have that 3 days to back out
Yeah,
the
it would
contract.
just be legislated by our government. So yeah, 3 days.
I know that they sent us all these clauses to like make sure we at least from I always like to double check that we should include in our contracts. Should
Hmm.
we then include that or it's implied?
I, well, yeah, I would say it's implied, right? If it's in our property law act, then it's gonna apply. I mean, it's never a bad idea to put it in your contract. Then
Yeah.
everyone's aware. But I would assume that the standard term, the contract would be changing.
So I'm a lawyer too, hey?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I always just put all these clauses in, and I've got like this clause database that I go to, and I'm like, yes, 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 all these apply.
Well, it's
Um,
the proper way to do it, right? If it's
yeah,
not in there, and it's funny. I'm just gonna go back to a little story. My law professor told me once when I was writing an exam, right? And you have all these ideas of what you want to say, and you assume certain things, right? And he goes, well, when I'm looking at your paper, if it's not on there, how am I supposed to know you knew that? Right. And it's the same thing with writing clauses, right? You have all these agreements in place, but if it's not in the contract, there's nothing a third party can look at and say, yeah, you knew that, or yeah, that was the way to do it.
excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So make sure it's there, it's clear, and everyone signed off on it,
Mm,
right? That's
exactly. Yeah. And
okay.
especially
So,
in these contract situations, right? Because those contracts say there's no side agreements, there's nothing else that's been guaranteed, right? So you don't want to
mm,
rely on any representations verbally.
and to that point of side agreements, like you know, some like to agree that okay, I'll take your furniture,
Hmm.
or some will say, yeah, like the whole house system is fired by firewood, and when we show up on closing, all the firewood that was outside is gone.
Yeah.
They would assume that oh, they'll leave the firewood for me.
Hmm.
No, I always say anything you want, let's put it in the contract. And then that's why when I'm like, when we're negotiating, it gets messy.
Yeah.
Let me negotiate the price. And then all these other nice things that you wish for, let's put that as step two
Hmm.
because we haven't closed yet. We haven't given the deposit yet.